The story begins not with a sighting, but with a sound. Sharp, insistent, and impossible to ignore. Somewhere in the tropical waters of Southeast Asia, a radio operator sat hunched over his equipment, straining to make sense of the static. Then, through the crackling distortion, a message came in Morse code. The words, when decoded, would chill even the most hardened sailor. SOS, from the Ourang Medan. All officers, including the captain, are dead, lying in chart room and bridge, possibly whole crew dead. A pause followed. The operator must have leaned closer, waiting for more, perhaps expecting coordinates or an explanation. What came instead was worse, final, almost whispered across the waves. "I die." And then, nothing. Silence returned, heavier than before. No follow-up call, no signal strength to trace, just a haunting echo that spread across the radio network. Sailors knew that distress calls could mean anything: piracy, fire, mechanical failure, but this one was different. It was not a plea for help. It was a death certificate broadcast into the void. From this moment, the name Ourang Medan was burned into the pages of maritime legend, not as another ship in trouble, but as a phantom, a mystery, a story that refuses to die. To truly understand how the legend of the Ourang Medan could take root, we must journey back to the late 1940s, when the world's oceans were still scarred by war. The Second World War had officially ended, but its shadow lingered everywhere. Vast numbers of ships had been repurposed for trade, many carrying dangerous remnants of wartime stockpiles, chemicals, munitions, even biological materials that governments preferred to keep hidden. Southeast Asia was one of the most unstable maritime regions on Earth. Indonesia had just declared independence from Dutch colonial rule, and the seas around Sumatra and Borneo became a crossroads of conflict, commerce, and smuggling. In this chaotic environment, merchant vessels were not just transporters of rice or rubber. They often carried illicit, highly dangerous cargo that could never be listed on official manifests. And in the middle of all this uncertainty, radio was the only lifeline. A single SOS was not just a plea, it was an obligation. International law and sailors' honor demanded that ships respond, but an SOS that described an entire crew dead, with no explanation, struck at the heart of maritime fears. It suggested not just danger, but the unknown, something powerful enough to kill silently, swiftly, and without leaving marks. This was the world in which the Ourang Medan appeared, and it is perhaps why the story gained such traction. It was a tale that fit too perfectly into the fears of the time. The distress signal was picked up across the region, but one ship in particular, the American merchant vessel Silver Star, is most often linked to the story. The crew of the Silver Star, hearing the haunting words of the SOS, decided they could not ignore the call. They altered their course, pushing through the humid air and restless seas of the Strait of Malacca. Hours passed, each mile adding tension, until finally the lookout spotted a faint outline on the horizon. There it was, the Ourang Medan, drifting silently, a ghost against the backdrop of the ocean. No smoke rose from its funnels, no lights flickered in the windows. Not a single sailor appeared on deck. The crew of the Silver Star attempted radio contact, but received no reply. With no other choice, they launched a boarding party. As the small boats approached, the silence of the Ourang Medan seemed almost unnatural, as if the sea itself held its breath. Climbing aboard, the men soon realized they were stepping into a nightmare that would haunt their memories forever. The moment the boarding party set foot on the Ourang Medan, they were struck by a scene so grim that words can scarcely do it justice. Bodies were everywhere. On the deck, in the chart room, slumped over controls on the bridge, every crew member lay dead. But it was not just death that horrified the rescuers, it was the way the bodies were found. Their eyes were wide open, mouths contorted into grotesque expressions of agony and fear. Some had arms outstretched, as if fending off an invisible attacker. Others clutched their chests or pointed toward the sky, frozen in their final moments. Even the ship's dog had not escaped the fate of its masters. It was discovered dead as well, teeth bared in a feral snarl, captured forever in a moment of terror. The strangest detail of all was the lack of visible wounds. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, no injuries. It was as if death had come silently, snuffing out life in an instant, leaving only faces twisted in horror. The men of the Silver Star felt a chill in the sweltering heat of the tropics. Whatever had killed the crew of the Ourang Medan had left no trace, except fear. The crew of the Silver Star knew they had stumbled upon something extraordinary, but the mystery gave them little time to think. After surveying the scene, they decided the only logical course of action was to tow the Ourang Medan back to port, where authorities might determine what had happened. Ropes were secured, engines prepared. But before the operation could begin, smoke began to rise from the lower decks of the ghost ship. At first, it was just a faint wisp curling into the air, easily mistaken for steam. Within minutes it grew thicker, blacker, and the smell of burning chemicals filled the air. Flames erupted suddenly, racing through the corridors of the ship with unnatural speed. The men scrambled to get back to their boats, abandoning the vessel as fire spread like a living thing. And then, the final blow. A violent explosion ripped through the Ourang Medan, shattering its silence forever. Witnesses described a thunderous roar, followed by a blast that seemed to split the sea itself. In moments, the ship was engulfed in flames, and then, as though swallowed whole, it vanished beneath the waves. There would be no salvage, no wreckage to study, only a lingering cloud of smoke on the horizon. With the Ourang Medan gone, all that remained were the memories and testimonies of the men who claimed to have seen it. And almost immediately, doubts began to surface. Maritime historians and researchers searching for evidence encountered a troubling reality. There was no official record of a ship named Ourang Medan. No entries in Lloyd's Register of Shipping, no insurance documents, no naval logs mentioning such a vessel. Even the identity of the rescuing ship was inconsistent. Most versions cite the Silver Star, but others mention entirely different names, like the city of Baltimore. The date of the alleged incident also shifts from account to account. Some say 1947, others 1948. Without coordinates, wreckage, or government records, the story seemed to exist only in scattered newspaper reports and retellings that surfaced years later. The earliest written sources traced back to Dutch and German papers in the late 1940s, each version slightly more dramatic than the last. For skeptics, this lack of documentation is damning evidence that the Ourang Medan may have never existed at all. For believers, however, it is exactly what one would expect if the ship carried a cargo so dangerous or so secret that powerful forces ensured it vanished from history. As researchers dug deeper, the contradictions only multiplied. Different newspapers reported different versions of the same story. Some claimed the Ourang Medan had been found near the Strait of Malacca, while others placed it much farther east, near the Solomon Islands, hundreds of miles away. Even the very name of the ship varied in certain accounts. The crew's condition was described inconsistently as well. One article spoke of sailors lying calmly as though asleep, while another insisted their bodies were contorted in terror, eyes wide and mouths twisted into silent screams. A few reports mentioned that survivors were briefly found, men who supposedly told of dangerous cargo before vanishing again, while others made no mention of survivors at all. And then there was the matter of the cold. Boarding parties described an unnatural chill aboard the ship, despite the tropical heat outside. Was this simply exaggeration, or did some unknown factor lower the temperature inside the vessel? Each retelling of the story seemed to add or remove details, creating a mosaic of half-truths, folklore, and speculation. And yet, Despite the contradictions, the legend endured. If anything, the inconsistencies only made the tale more tantalizing, as though the truth were being deliberately obscured. Among the many theories about what befell the Ourang Medan, one of the most widely discussed is the chemical cargo hypothesis. According to this line of thought, the ship was smuggling dangerous substances, possibly leftover chemical weapons from World War II, or volatile compounds such as potassium cyanide and nitroglycerin. If such materials were stored improperly in the sweltering heat of the tropics, a small leak or reaction could have released toxic gases, silently suffocating the crew. This would explain why the bodies bore no signs of violence. Death by inhalation leaves no obvious external wounds. It might also account for the ship's sudden destruction. If chemicals like nitroglycerin were on board, even the smallest spark could have triggered the catastrophic explosion that sent the vessel to the bottom of the sea. Supporters of this theory argue that it neatly ties together the details: the mysterious deaths, the terror on the sailors' faces, the fire, and the explosion. But critics counter that there is no proof the Ourang Medan ever carried such cargo. Without a manifest, without wreckage, the theory remains as speculative as the story itself. Another explanation often cited by maritime historians is far less dramatic, but no less plausible: a malfunction in the ship's boiler system. Steamships of the 1940s were powered by engines that relied on coal and fuel oil, and poor maintenance could lead to catastrophic leaks. If the boiler room developed cracks, or if ventilation failed, deadly carbon monoxide gas could seep silently through the ship. Invisible, odorless, and lethal, the gas would have incapacitated the crew without warning. This theory explains the lack of physical injuries. The sailors might have collapsed where they stood, their bodies later contorted by rigor mortis into the twisted shapes described. It might even explain the strange reports of a chilling cold on board. Carbon monoxide poisoning can cause victims to feel freezing sensations before death. As for the explosion, a spark from the engine room or an attempt to restart the failing boiler could have ignited fuel vapors, sealing the ship's fate. Skeptics favor this explanation because it does not require secret cargo or government conspiracies, just bad luck and poor engineering. Yet, like all theories, it remains unconfirmed, floating in the same fog of uncertainty as the legend itself. But for those drawn to intrigue, there is another possibility: that the Ourang Medan was deliberately destroyed. Some believe the ship was engaged in smuggling highly sensitive cargo, chemical or biological weapons, perhaps stolen from wartime stockpiles. If word of its existence leaked, authorities might have sought to erase every trace of it. The mysterious deaths could have been the result of exposure to dangerous material, or even deliberate poisoning to silence the crew. The sudden fire and explosion might then have been no accident, but a controlled detonation to sink the evidence before outsiders could intervene. Supporters of this theory point to the shifting details in the reports, the absence of official records, and the reluctance of governments to comment. If the Ourang Medan was indeed carrying illicit cargo, then erasing it from history would have served both practical and political purposes. The theory of sabotage transforms the story from a maritime tragedy into a cloak-and-dagger tale of secrecy, where truth was sacrificed to keep dangerous knowledge buried beneath the waves. While rational explanations have their place, the Ourang Medan has also inspired a host of supernatural theories. Many who hear the story fixate on the most unsettling detail: the expressions of pure terror said to be frozen on the faces of the crew. Skeptics argue this can be explained by natural causes like rigor mortis, but others insist it points to something far stranger. Some claim the ship stumbled into a supernatural phenomenon, a cursed stretch of sea where spirits linger, or a deadly force beyond human comprehension. The unnaturally cold atmosphere reported on board has been taken as further evidence of ghostly activity, as sudden drops in temperature are often associated with hauntings. For paranormal enthusiasts, the Ourang Medan is not just another lost vessel, but a ghost ship in the truest sense, one literally claimed by forces not of this world. Stories of phantom ships have circulated for centuries, from the Flying Dutchman to the Mary Celeste, and the Ourang Medan fits seamlessly into this tradition. Whether you believe in curses or not, there's no denying that the mystery has taken on a life beyond logic, transforming into a maritime legend fueled by fear of the unknown. And then, of course, there is the theory that reaches far beyond Earth itself. Some fringe researchers suggest the crew of the Ourang Medan may have encountered something not human at all. The terrified expressions, the sudden mass deaths, the lack of physical injuries, all of these have been linked by believers to extraterrestrial contact. Could the ship have crossed paths with an unidentified flying object, or been exposed to an energy source of unknown origin? Proponents of this theory argue that such an encounter could explain the bizarre scene found on board. Sailors seemingly struck down by an invisible force, their bodies frozen mid-scream. Others go even further, suggesting that the Ourang Medan was involved in secret government experiments connected to alien technology, and that the explosion was a deliberate attempt to cover up evidence. While mainstream historians dismiss these claims as pure speculation, they remain popular in UFO communities and conspiracy forums. In many ways, the extraterrestrial theory thrives because it refuses to be disproven. Without records or wreckage, the imagination fills the void with the most dramatic possibility of all. One of the most peculiar and persistent details in the Ourang Medan story is the unnatural chill that boarding parties reported when stepping onto the ship. This claim has been repeated across versions of the tale. Despite the blazing tropical heat outside, the decks and cabins of the vessel felt icy, almost as if the ship itself had been frozen in time. Some explanations attempt to rationalize the phenomenon. Perhaps a chemical reaction created a sudden drop in temperature. Or maybe the steel structure retained coolness from deep ocean currents. But for many, the detail resonates on a more supernatural level. In folklore and ghost stories around the world, sudden cold spots are considered a hallmark of paranormal presence. To those inclined toward mystery, the icy atmosphere of the Ourang Medan becomes evidence of something beyond the natural order. A curse, a haunting, or even an energy source foreign to human understanding. Whether explained by science or superstition, the cold ship in a hot sea remains one of the most chilling aspects of the legend. A detail that turns an already terrifying discovery into something almost otherworldly. Though most versions of the story end with the entire crew dead, some rare accounts introduce an intriguing twist, the existence of a survivor. One such story mentions a German-born sailor known only as Jerry Rabbit, who allegedly washed ashore in the Marshall Islands. According to this version, Jerry revealed that the ship had been carrying a secret cargo of dangerous chemicals, possibly even nerve agents. He claimed that the crew had succumbed to toxic fumes after an accidental leak, and that he alone managed to escape. However, the tale grows murkier the deeper you examine it. There are no official records of a man by this name, no medical notes, and no credible testimony to back up the story. Some researchers believe the survivor was a complete fabrication, added later to give the mystery more dramatic flair. Others wonder if such a man really existed, but was silenced before he could reveal too much. Either way, the survivor narrative adds another layer of complexity, transforming the Ourang Medan from a ghost story into something resembling a conspiracy thriller. If true, it might have been the only first-hand glimpse into what really happened aboard that doomed vessel. Perhaps the most suspicious aspect of the Ourang Medan saga is not what was said, but what was not. Despite reports of distress calls, boarding parties, and an explosion at sea, no official government inquiry was ever launched. No Dutch records mention the vessel, even though the name itself, Ourang Medan, means man from Medan in Malay, directly linking it to the Indonesian city of Medan. The United States and Britain, both with extensive naval presences in the region, also remain silent on the matter. If such a mysterious ship truly exploded and sank, why would no maritime authority have investigated? Some argue that this silence proves the ship never existed, that it was nothing more than sensational journalism born out of rumor. Others, however, claim that the silence is deliberate, a coordinated effort to erase the Ourang Medan from history. If the ship carried illegal weapons, chemical stockpiles, or even biological agents, it would make sense for governments to cover it up rather than risk international scandal. In the absence of official comment, the silence itself becomes fuel for conspiracy, leaving us to wonder whether the truth was buried at the bottom of the sea or in locked filing cabinets that will never be opened. By this point, the Ourang Medan legend becomes less a story and more a battlefield of competing theories. Each explanation, from chemical poisoning to paranormal curses, has its defenders and detractors. Scientific minds argue that faulty engineering or toxic cargo are the most logical answers, while skeptics dismiss the entire tale as a hoax invented by post-war newspapers hungry for readers. Meanwhile, conspiracy theorists weave elaborate narratives of smuggling, sabotage, and cover-ups, pointing to the absence of records as proof of hidden truths. Paranormal enthusiasts see the sailors' expressions of horror as undeniable evidence that something unexplainable occurred. Theories even clash over small details. Was the explosion natural or deliberate? Did the ship exist or not? Were survivors real or fabricated? This collision of perspectives has kept the story alive for decades. Each retelling reshapes the mystery, like a kaleidoscope shifting its pieces into new patterns. And in the end, the lack of definitive proof is what makes the Ourang Medan so enduring. It is not one story, but many, an enigma shaped by belief, skepticism, and imagination in equal measure. The deeper one dives into the legend of the Ourang Medan, the more contradictions surface. In some accounts, the crew of the Silver Star carefully recorded their observations, while in others, they barely had time to board before the fire forced them away. Certain versions describe the bodies as being intact, but twisted with fear, while others insist the sailors showed signs of rapid decomposition, as though they had been dead for weeks. Even the ship's name sometimes changes, with a few reports suggesting variations that never appear again in maritime history. These inconsistencies may seem like evidence of fabrication, but they also mirror how stories evolve when passed from one sailor to another, from portside gossip to print in local newspapers. Oral traditions often warp details, amplifying drama while losing factual precision. And yet what is most telling is that despite the changing names, dates, and descriptions, the core of the story remains remarkably consistent. A ghostly SOS, a ship full of dead sailors, and a fiery end that left no trace. Whether legend or truth, the contradictions add to its allure, making the Ourang Medan less of a puzzle to solve and more of a riddle to ponder. One of the greatest mysteries of the Ourang Medan story is not the deaths of its crew, but the ship's complete disappearance. Maritime disasters, even in the mid-20th century, usually left behind wreckage, floating debris, lifeboats, or cargo that washed ashore. But with the Ourang Medan, nothing was ever recovered. After the supposed explosion, the ship slipped beneath the waves, leaving no trace. No salvage operations were recorded, no fragments of metal or oil slicks reported drifting in the sea. In an era when even small wrecks were often catalogued, the absence of any physical evidence raises serious questions. Did the ship truly explode? Was it scuttled intentionally and sunk in a location far from where reports placed it? Or did it never exist in the first place, its destruction imagined only to explain why no proof could be found? The ocean is vast, and countless wrecks remain undiscovered. But the Ourang Medan's vanishing act is part of what makes it so powerful as a legend. It is as though the sea itself conspired to erase the vessel, leaving only whispers on the wind and fragments of a tale no one can confirm. The tale of the Ourang Medan did not emerge in isolation. It belongs to a much older tradition of maritime folklore. Sailors have always told stories of ghost ships, vessels that appear out of the mist with skeletal crews or none at all, doomed to wander the seas forever. The most famous of these is the Flying Dutchman, said to be cursed to sail until Judgment Day, a harbinger of doom to those who see it. In the 19th century, the Mary Celeste became a real-life enigma after being discovered abandoned in the Atlantic. Its crew vanished without explanation. The Ourang Medan fits neatly into this lineage, a post-war ghost story born in an age when the sea still held mysteries, but was slowly being mapped and mastered. What makes it unique is the sheer horror of the imagery. Not just an abandoned ship, but a deck littered with corpses frozen in terror. For sailors, such stories served as cautionary tales, reminders of the sea's danger, of invisible threats, of forces beyond human control. To the public on land, they offered a glimpse into the uncanny world of those who lived and died by the ocean. Whether real or myth, the Ourang Medan is a ghost ship that continues this ancient tradition. While the Ourang Medan may have slipped through the cracks of official history, it has thrived in the age of digital media. In the mid-20th century, the story survived in obscure maritime magazines and whispered retellings. But with the rise of the internet, it was reborn for a global audience. YouTube documentaries, podcasts, and Reddit threads have dissected every angle, from skeptical debunkings to passionate defenses of the tale's authenticity. Online forums thrive on mysteries, and the Ourang Medan offers the perfect blend of horror, conspiracy, and unanswered questions. In gaming, it reached mainstream recognition with the release of the Dark Pictures anthology, Man of Medan in 2019, which reimagined the legend as a cinematic horror experience where players could live the nightmare. Each new medium breathes fresh life into the ship's legend, reshaping it for new generations. The fact that the Ourang Medan may never have existed matters little in the digital age. What matters is the fascination it sparks, the debates it fuels, and the eerie sense that maybe, just maybe, the sea really did once swallow a ship full of frozen, terrified souls. What gives the Ourang Medan its power is not the supposed facts of the case, but the way it lingers in imagination. If the story were neatly solved, if wreckage had been found, if documents clearly identified the ship, if a single survivor had testified with proof, it might have faded into the annals of forgotten maritime accidents. Instead, the absence of certainty keeps it alive. Every unanswered question becomes a hook that pulls us deeper. Why did the crew die without wounds? Why was the ship so cold? Why did it explode just as rescuers arrived? Why do governments remain silent? In mystery storytelling, gaps are more compelling than answers, and the Ourang Medan is full of gaps. It endures because it straddles the line between legend and reality, too detailed to dismiss outright, yet too inconsistent to accept as fact. Like a ghost flickering in and out of sight, the story appears real enough to haunt, but elusive enough to escape capture. And perhaps that is the essence of its legacy. Not truth, but uncertainty, woven into the very waves of the ocean that swallowed it. Over the decades, the Ourang Medan has become a battleground between skeptics and believers. Skeptics argue that the absence of registry records, official investigations, or verifiable eyewitnesses makes the case clear. The ship never existed, and the story is nothing more than a post-war myth inflated by sensationalist journalism. They compare it to other maritime hoaxes, tales invented to sell newspapers or entertain sailors in portside taverns. Believers, however, counter with equal passion. To them, the very inconsistencies prove a cover-up. They point to the possibility of illegal chemical cargo, the silence of governments, and the detailed accounts in multiple newspapers as signs that something real happened, something authorities wanted erased. Between these two camps, the truth is lost. perhaps forever. And yet, the debate itself is part of the allure. Each side fuels the legend, the skeptics sharpen its edges with rational doubt, while the believers keep its ghost alive with conviction. The Ourang Medan thus sails eternally, not on the ocean, but in the stormy waters of human belief, where fact and faith collide and keep mysteries alive. At its core, the Ourang Medan story is less about maritime records and more about human fear. The elements that make it so enduring are not the logistics of shipping lanes or the accuracy of registries, but the imagery of what was found on deck. Men frozen in terror, eyes wide, mouths open as if screaming at something invisible. It speaks to a primal fear, the idea of dying not only suddenly, but in horror at the sight of something we cannot explain. Humans are storytellers by nature, and when faced with gaps in knowledge, we fill them with the darkest images our imagination can conjure. That is why ghost stories persist across cultures, why we invent monsters to explain the inexplicable. The Ourang Medan is, in many ways, a perfect vessel for fear. It combines isolation, sudden death, mystery, and silence into a single tale. Whether it was caused by chemicals, sabotage, or something supernatural, it leaves behind an emotional truth. The terror of facing the unknown, of realizing that some things in this world, and in the seas that cover most of it, may never be fully understood. If there is one place on Earth suited to hide mysteries, it is the ocean. Covering more than 70% of the planet, its depths remain largely unexplored. A world of pressure, darkness, and silence. Shipwrecks vanish into its depths every year, some rediscovered decades later, others lost forever. In this vast and merciless environment, a vessel like the Ourang Medan could easily disappear without a trace. The sea has always been both a highway and a graveyard, swallowing ships whole and erasing the evidence of their existence. That is why maritime legends endure. They rest on the undeniable truth that the ocean keeps secrets better than any locked vault. The Ourang Medan reminds us of this reality. Whether the ship truly sailed or was only ever a tale, the ocean provides the perfect stage for its myth. Its vastness allows us to believe that somewhere, in the depths, the truth lies waiting, unreachable, hidden by miles of crushing water. And as long as the sea guards its secrets, humanity will continue to tell stories like this one. Because the unknown is never truly gone, only submerged. The Ourang Medan may never be proven real, and yet it remains one of the most compelling maritime mysteries ever told. Perhaps its power lies not in facts, but in the unanswered questions it raises. Was it a chemical accident, a smuggling operation gone wrong, or a story invented to sell newspapers, or was it something beyond the reach of rational explanation? The truth may no longer matter. What matters is the way the story endures, reshaped by every generation that retells it. It speaks to the universal human fascination with the unknown, our deep-seated need to believe that the world still holds mysteries beyond our control. The tale of the Ourang Medan is a mirror, reflecting not only the fears of sailors in the 1940s, but our own fears today. In an age of satellites and instant communication, we like to believe everything can be explained. Yet here is a story that refuses to die. A reminder that not all is mapped, not all is measured, and some shadows remain beyond the reach of light. And so, the Ourang Medan sails on, not across the seas but across time, carried by voices that refuse to let it sink. A ship with no official record, no survivors, no wreck, yet immortal in legend. It is remembered through a single transmission, a message scratched across the airwaves of history. All officers, including the captain, are dead. Possibly whole crew dead. I die. Those final words still echo, as chilling now as when they were first reported. Perhaps they were the desperate cry of a dying sailor. Perhaps they were a fabrication, a hoax that spiraled into myth. Or perhaps they were something else entirely. a warning carried across the ocean, meant for us to hear. Whatever the truth, the Ourang Medan reminds us of one haunting certainty. The sea will always keep its secrets, but every so often, it whispers just enough to keep us listening. And that whisper, faint but enduring, is why this ghost ship will never be forgotten.